In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to build and grow your team.
This is the Stretch Goals podcast, where each week we'll share insights and lessons learned based on our experiences as entrepreneurs. We'll challenge you to create ambitious goals as you start and grow your business. I'm your host, Scott Davis.
And I'm Robert Dickerson. Building a great team is really critical to the success of your company. So you need to focus on hiring the right people that both fit into the culture of your company and also fit into the current needs of the company. So in this episode, we're going to talk about ways to find employees, strategies to create your hiring process, and why you should hire for your current company needs. So I know for me that hiring is a challenging process because it takes time to find the right people that have the right fit in terms of skill set and also fit into the company culture. And I've hired both contractors and employees. And I think I wanted to talk about both hiring contractors and employees because I think there's similar ways that you find those people, but the hiring process is a little bit different. Maybe even the vetting process is slightly different. So why don't you talk about how you've grown your team at MobX, both in terms of hiring contractors, hiring employees, and how you started out and how you're continuing to hire people now that you've grown the team?
Sure. It's a great question. And it's things that always come up, when you're trying to hire out your team. For me, I started out hiring contractors part-time because at the time I was cash flow conscious and just making sure that I had enough revenue that could cover all my costs. So I started out with contractors. And for me, I didn't necessarily go online looking for, resources there. I went through people that I knew, someone that I could trust, who maybe had a little bit of extra time and who I trusted from a technical perspective as well to get things done. And then once the workload, sort of went beyond that capacity, I had to make, other decisions. How do I bring on someone full-time, and is it going to be a contractor or a W-2? So W-2 is, your full-time employee, 1099 is a contractor. And there's lots of different considerations to be made there. The biggest factor is probably, just the overhead on a W-2 full-time employee versus, a contractor. Obviously, you have to pay your employment taxes and things like that. And so initially, I went with 1099 contractors. But, what I found is that generally there's no sense of ownership there from a contractor. They tend to be a little bit disconnected from the product and the company and what they're doing. So I shifted to hiring key individuals as full-time, W-2 employees. And again, most of the people that I hired were people I knew from previous experience. But the contractors that I found, and I found some great ones, because basically my first three key individuals are W-2 full-time, and then the rest of my assets are contractors. And those are said assets, not employees.
I think the key individuals is something really good that you touched on, is that you don't necessarily have to hire all of your team as employees if you have the key people that you want to give responsibility to, and then they can help manage contractors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a knowledge share and there's lots of different benefits to that. But, and sometimes contractors are part-time, like maybe they've got something else going on, or maybe they're just looking for nights and weekends kind of work, and that's fine too. But, I identified what I needed.
It's nice to have buy-in from people too, right? As employees, I've found the similar thing is that sometimes contractors aren't bought in, right? They're just hourly, so they're just trying to make the next buck. And so that's really important.
It's definitely, absolutely. It's definitely a mentality difference. And you'll find that when you're going out there, contractors at the beginning of a project are very much in tune with what you need and where you need to go. And then after a couple of those paychecks are sent, they're more disconnected and more about making money, and it kind of becomes obvious. And that's sad but true. But there's still a lot of good freelancers, contractors, consultants, whatever you want to call them out there, who love what they do. I'm one of them. You're one of them. And we're very connected to the product. But, I guess that's part of what some of our topics are here today. Like, how do we find good ones that are, separate or stand out from the crowd? But anyway, for MobX, that's how it worked for me. I have a hybrid team. It works for me, may not work for you. But what's your environment like?
Well, I wanted to touch on two different things that we talked about, and then we can jump into that. One is when you're trying to make the decision between a contractor and employee, think about the backlog of work that you have, and can you keep this person busy full time, or is it more of a part-time job? And actually, one thing that I found with contractors is that If they're only working 4 to 6 hours a day, sometimes they could be more productive than a full-time 40-hour employee because you're not really getting a full 40 hours of work out of that person. You might only be realistically getting 4 to 6 hours. And so I've found contractors, a lot of times they can really hone down and focus for 4 to 6 hours and get something done if you're able to communicate with them effectively exactly what they need to do and when you expect it to get done. And so they can be super productive. And I've, with MapOut, I've really used that found that to be very effective. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the churn of contractors. And that's something that I'm dealing with right now in MapOut is that contractors, if they find other jobs or if a lot of times they'll be working part-time at night. If they find another job, full-time job, sometimes that can restrict them from doing contract work. And so there's a lot of churn and ups and downs with contract work where you're going to have to structure the work such that it's documented, such that you can pull people in and out quickly. And so that's something to think about too when you do contract work, that you need to think about the availability of those people and really ask them, what's your availability? How long can you work on this? Especially if you're focusing on something that's a long-term project.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one thing to that. The mentality when you're hiring a contractor should always be that they are not permanent, right? That's just the nature of it. Typically your contract says that you can terminate them or they can step away from the project at any time. I mean, that's just the nature of consulting and freelancers. So just something to keep in mind and not necessarily assume that they're there forever, whereas with a full-time employee, there's kind of that implication that you're going to get 2 weeks notice and things like that.
That's a great point. So if we go back to how I found employees for MapOut and contractors, I use LinkedIn and I use my existing network as well to start out because I had already worked with those people and vetted them and understood that they were really good at what they did. And then I also use referrals from people that I know. I found that to be really effective.
Yeah.
And I think one thing to note too is that when you bring someone on and you interview someone, don't be afraid to turn them down quickly. A lot of times with contractors, I'll let them do a small project to determine if they're a good fit. And sometimes, you kind of know in your gut whether this person's the right fit, and sometimes you'll ignore that because you need to get the work done. And that's really bit me in the past. You really need to make sure that if this person's not a good fit, cut it right there, move on to the next person because there are really good people out there. You just need to find the right person that fits with you. And then the other area I wanted to talk about was, job boards and how to find people. And I've really found that Upwork is a great resource for contractors. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the process that you use for that. And basically what you do is you post a job description up there. And then people submit resumes, they submit they're interested in this job and how they'd be a good fit. And you can get hundreds of candidates on there sometimes.
Yeah.
And so then you have to go through and figure out and conduct interviews with those people to figure out if they're a good fit. And that could be a really time-consuming process. And that when you're dealing with contractors and the churn, that can take up a lot of your time to find the right people.
So, Rob, you mentioned something about, giving them a contractor a sample project. I've seen this before in both corporate environments and, startups and consulting gigs. Is this something that you compensate for, or are you just expecting them to do the project, pro bono, just to show what they're worth, or how's that structured for you?
Well, normally what I'll do is ask them for example, like let's say I'm hiring a developer. I'll start out by asking them for example code, example projects, and I can run through that and really get a good sense just from looking at example code and projects that they've worked on, whether they're a good fit. And then after that, I actually pay them for a project usually it's about 10 hours or so, and it has something to do with exactly what they'll be doing. Maybe they use existing code that I've already created, or I create a basic structure and ask them to fill in code. And so that gives me a really good idea of whether they're a good fit, depending on how fast they can complete it, what the quality of their work is. And I found that this works as well for bloggers and marketing and sales jobs as well, is that you can give them a small project. For the blogger, I ask her to write, maybe 1,000-word article on a specific topic. And I paid her for it, and then that was a good way to evaluate whether she'd be a good fit for the company. I've heard it both ways. A lot of times for full-time employees, you'll bring people in and you'll give them projects and you won't compensate them. I don't do that for freelancers. Sometimes people offer to do that. And if they offer it, then I'll take them up on it for a free project. But Most of the time I pay people. When you've hired, how have you done it?
Well, for me, I usually I compensate them just because it really burns me when a company expects you. If you're going through an interview process, that takes time. Some cases, you've got to fly out somewhere. I've actually been burned on not being paid, compensated for flights to go interview with a company. So for me, if you're asking me to spend 8 hours on a project or 10 hours on a project, I expect to be paid for it unless I've offered to do that. And yeah, look, if you really want the position, you do whatever they ask. But in a competitive market, with a fair hiring process, they're going to compensate you for that work. So that's why I do that. When I ask for a project, if I'm really on the fence about hiring this individual, or I really need to see some technical competence there, I will compensate them on an hourly basis or a fixed fee, $1,000 or something. Do this project. And like you said, it'll be very closely related to the tasks that they're going to be doing for my company.
I think it's more professional to pay people because you're treating, you want to treat them fairly. Like you said, I don't expect to do something for free for someone. I'll talk about things, but I'm not going to spend time doing it for free. And so I try to treat people the same way, as that, this is a professional organization. We're going to compensate you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And, I've never had somebody say to me, hey, let me do this for free. But if they did, I don't know how I'd feel about that. I'd probably feel a little bad, but I have in the past when trying to acquire a customer or a position, I have offered to do a sample project or something along those lines, pro bono.
So after they complete the sample project, I think it's important to evaluate them then, and if they're not a good fit, to let them go and keep going with your search. I know a lot of times there can be timing constraints of getting projects done, and you need someone now to do it. But I think it's important to trust your gut and whether or not they're a right fit, and make that decision pretty quickly and move on.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen it recently where a company tried to put effort into an employee who we ultimately knew wasn't a good fit. This was one of my customers, and I was helping them hire, and they were sort of desperate. They wanted to get these tasks done, and they pulled the trigger, and we knew in the bottom of our stomachs that it wasn't right. And within 3 weeks, he was gone. So I agree. I mean, if you even have, it's like a marriage. If you even have a doubt, don't do it. Just don't do it. There's other candidates out there. Find someone better.
Yeah, I've run into the same situation where I've hired a couple people, and usually I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? I want them to be successful, and I want them to succeed. And sometimes that's a detriment to me because I know based on their work that they're not a good fit, but I let them continue to go. And really, if you're in a startup, it's important that you don't waste money on things. And so that's why I think it's really important. And even if you're hiring full-time employees, right, you don't want to waste money on someone that's not a good fit for your company. So you need to make those decisions quickly. And if you do hire the wrong person, make it so that they're starting on projects that they should be easily able to complete. And you're really communicating. And that's kind of the next part I want to talk about too, is that, once you hire these employees, how do you make them most effective?
Yeah, time is money. You got to make that decision quickly and move on if they're not right for you.
So I think the next part we want to talk about is we've kind of focused on the hiring process, but what happens after you hire them? I think it's important that you are able to communicate with them the milestones and the goals that you want them to hit and hit the ground running. And I think it's important that you hire people that are better than you at their specific skill. And I've really found in my companies doing that has really helped grow the product, because I'll have a basic idea, basic concept, and you give it to someone that's really good in their domain, and they can take it to the next level that I would never have been able to myself. And so I think it's important that you clearly communicate and give ownership over the task and what you want them to do. And then you also have give them flexibility to put their stamp on it, to really be accountable for getting that job done and have ownership over it. And I've really found that that's important for people, is that a lot of times people really want that ownership, right? They want that accountability to do a great job. And you really need to give that to them to really get the most out of people.
That's exactly why a lot of people go out on their own to start their own businesses, because they don't have that in the corporate world, right? They don't have that flexibility or that connection with the product. So if you let them own their vertical within your company, you know, for me, like hiring a marketing person, I don't know squat about marketing, so I let them own it, and they're passionate about it, and that's their thing, and then they're more invested in your company.
I think you still need to communicate your vision, your expectations to them, and
Absolutely.
really provide a framework for them to operate in. And if you do that, then then provide them the accountability, they can just run with it.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's part of it. You have to be able to set the vision as a founder and a leader. You have to be able to set that end goal or goals, and basically, you pave the runway and then get out of the way and let them do their job.
You really want to get, you want to get people to buy in to the culture, to the vision that you're creating. And by doing,
Absolutely.
what we're talking about, where you hire people that are better than you and you really give them ownership, that's how you do that, right? That's how you get people to buy in, and you make them want to continue working with you. And I think another thing too is to really treat people with respect and tell them thank you, right? I think that's really important. Thank you for this contribution that you made to the company. And I
Yeah.
think people forget that. They get so wrapped up in, I'm paying you, this is your job, you should just be doing this.
Hmm.
No, you need to recognize people, you need to thank people. And I've found that to be a really effective way to get people bought into the culture and what you want to do.
Absolutely. And, it was Steve Jobs who said, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And, that's the same concept. You hire somebody who's smarter than you, better than you, knows more than you in certain areas, and you let them do their job. And at the end of the day, if you give them a little bit of appreciation, they're going to go the extra mile for you the next time.
So let's talk about hiring for the current needs of your company, because I think this is also an important aspect of hiring, is that when you're hiring a person, you need to look at, whether your company is a startup, whether it's a established company, what are you trying to accomplish with your startup? Are you just getting started and you're trying to hire the first couple employees? Are you trying to grow your sales team, from 10 people to 50 people? Hiring for a specific position is dependent upon your current company needs. So you don't want to hire someone maybe that has a lot of experience in a large company for a startup, right? Because they were able to become successful in that large company because there were already frameworks established, they already had teams established. So it's a different challenge, from growing a company from working into an established company. So I think it's important when you hire, you need to look at what does the person bring in terms of experience at the current stage your company's in, and also how can they grow and change into the role that you want them to become. Are they willing to learn and really have a growth mindset that they can learn? Because I think you're never going to find the perfect person that is going to meet your company now and grow in the future, right? Everyone has skills, but they also need to learn things. So you need to look at, are they willing to learn? Are they willing to grow? And really help you be motivated and have ownership in your company to really grow it forward.
Right. And so if you had two candidates on paper, one was, maybe a director or VP level at a Fortune 500 company, and then you had someone who had bounced around startups and, did some things. And let's say from a technical perspective, or requirements perspective, they both meet all the check marks. The statement you said was that, you're going to have an adjustment period with that corporate world person coming into the startup environment. So what would make you hire that person over the person within the startup realm?
I think in terms of the interview, you'd really need to ask them how, have they been successful at this stage of the company, but also how are they going to, talk about the current problems that you're experiencing and how are they going to grow it? I'm not saying that someone that's a VP of sales in a large company can't do it, but they need to have a good idea about what the challenges are. And you need to communicate that with them in the interview process, that maybe, hey, we don't have any frameworks in place. We don't have any processes in place. You're going to be creating those. You need to be motivated, self-motivated to do all this type of stuff. So I think that's important that you be really clear during the interview process and also get their feedback about how they would grow the team, how they would do different things in the startup mindset so you can get a better understanding. And the same with
I think you're right.
the person you're talking about that's gone through different startups. It's the same kind of thing. Were they successful in their startups? How do they envision moving your company forward, and how can they help you?
Yeah, that transparency, just setting it out there, like, here's the expectations, how are you going to come in and benefit us? But, that's just a comparison I wanted to make. If obviously you're going to get a wide array of people applying for your positions, or you come across, and how do you make that decision on what's best for your company? But that's great. I mean, that transparency, you set the expectations, and regardless of what environment they're coming from, you gauge their responses to those situations, and see what they say and see if they're a good fit for what you're trying to achieve.
Like for MapOut, I hired a designer initially, and I wanted to get a logo, basic landing pages, things like that. And the guy took a really long time. He was really fretting over, the fonts and the color schemes and all these different things. And that wasn't the state I was in, right? I wasn't a large company that was, had a ton of money to waste and spend on, whether this shade of green or blue was the right color. I needed someone to hit the ground running and make quick decisions and get the landing page up so I could start selling my product. So for me, he wasn't a good fit. And it was because, he was more experienced with a world that, you had a lot longer, and they put a lot more focus on these detailed types of things.
But was that a breakdown on your part? Did you not set that expectation up front? Is that how you learned that?
I didn't. Yeah. So that was, that was on me to set that expectation that, hey, we don't have a lot of time to make these decisions. You need to trust your gut and make them, and let's keep moving the ball forward. So yeah, that was definitely on me there.
Right, you can always tweak later.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was definitely on me to make those decisions. And I think in a future episode, we're going to talk about that, really perfecting things versus launching. And that's when you're really starting your company, you need to make quick decisions, and you need to kind of push things forward as opposed to having a lot of time to spend doing things.
I couldn't agree more.
So talk a little bit about hiring for your company. How do you identify people that fit within the culture and fit within your current company needs?
For me, it's mostly about the culture and the ability to get along with, my existing staff.
What about maybe the last person you hired? Builder. Talk about the last person you hired, just kind of what role it was and how you found that they were a good fit.
Sure. So I was looking to hire a junior iPhone and iPad developer, and I was willing to spend a good deal of my time bringing this person up to speed, and just investing in them a little bit to bring them up to where I needed them to be, over a couple months, and then let them run free after that point, after sort of proving themselves on some smaller projects. And, there's a million junior iOS developers out there, and they're all eager, and they all dabble in all these different things. And it was difficult to really identify one that would fit well. Ultimately, I went with someone who would fit both well within my company, just in terms of like getting along with people of different personalities. Like, I've got some people who are very reserved and quiet, and I've got people like me who won't shut up. So they needed to fit well in that group and respect everybody, but at the same time still have the technical chops to do it. And I had two candidates. One of them was sort of more social and more of a go-getter, and the other one was more laid back, but you could tell like he was really passionate. He just wanted to learn. So that's the guy I went with, and he's done a great job. I've been showing him everything I know and trying to get him up to speed. Upside for me is he's a junior guy, so I get him for a significant discount. But the goal for me and what I'm doing is that I'm now putting knowledge into this guy, who then will be more experienced this time next year. Maybe I give him a salary bump, and then at the same time, he's going to train the next wave of people that come in, so that I have more time to focus on other things. So that's my goal, is to just really build the talent internally. I want people, when they leave my company, to go to Google, to go to Apple and work on huge, awesome projects. I want them to have the technical expertise and confidence to go on and do great things. So I'm really just about fostering that kind of environment.
I think it's a good point that you made, that you're investing in this person. You're not only spending money, you're investing your time and energy to help this person. And so, if they're passionate, I found that to be a great trait of people. And I really like to hire those people too, because it's not always about what you know, that you know everything, you can solve every problem in the book, book smart. You really need to be passionate, be willing to learn, and be willing to try things and fail. And I think that's a really important trait for people. And I always enjoy working with those types of people that, are willing to try things, willing to really to invest their own time to grow, help themselves grow, but also the company grow.
Sure. And there's one thing to note, everybody hates a know-it-all, right? And people who are strictly book smart or just have a great resume, they tend to be know-it-alls. Well, when I was at company X, we did this. Nobody cares, right? I care if you do your job. I do care. I do appreciate your creativity and your ideas, but it doesn't matter. Like, we're talking about a project today and how we're going to solve it. But that passion, always exists through that. If you've got a stressful project, passion keeps you going. Previous experience doesn't, right? But your experience is still, important. But I'll hire passion over experience any day.
Yeah, I think people need to be flexible as well. They need to take their experiences and be able to apply them in different ways for different contexts, right? And I think also another point is that they need to be able to communicate effectively as well, both in terms of what they're doing. And I think that's a really important thing that I've done during the hiring process is after people complete, a small project, a 10-hour project, I get them to do for a developer, for instance, I get them to do a code review, or I'll get them to kind of walk me through their process of how they created the thing. Because I think that's just as important as doing the work, right? You have to be able to communicate why you did it. It has to be something that people can grow the product, can still continue to work on, especially for a developer, right? The code needs to be something that you can continue to build on and grow on. It's not just a one-off type thing. And so I think those things are also very important during the hiring process.
For sure. I mean, that's all part of it.
So let's wrap up the episode. So today we talked about, how to build and grow your team. I hope it gave you some good insights and some things to think about, in terms of hiring the right people that both fit the culture of your company and the current needs. And, let us know ways that you found good people and the hiring processes that you use. I know there's tons of different processes out there that people, are really passionate about and found that work for them.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stretch Goals Podcast. You can access the show notes for this episode and listen to other episodes by heading over to stretchgoals.fm.